This is a sermon from St. Paul's Church, Brookfield, Connecticut, transforming lives through Jesus. For more information, go to www.stpaulsbrookfield.com.
Good morning. Please be seated. I want to open with the reading from Revelation chapter 12. And I heard a loud voice in heaven saying, "Now the salvation and the power and the kingdom of our God and the authority of his Christ have come. For the accuser of our brothers has been thrown down, who accuses them day and night before our God. And they have conquered him by the blood of the Lamb and by the word of their testimony. For they love not their lives, even unto death." I believe that it's the power of our testimonies working together, that we are building the body of Christ, building the community with one another, that we are lifting up the name of Christ and letting his Spirit work through us. That's my prayer this morning as I share my testimony with you. My favorite songwriter is a man named Andrew Peterson. And I'm going to read to you some of the lyrics from his song, Many Roads. If you'll step inside this great glass elevator, it'll take us up above the city lights to where the planet curves away to the equator. I want to show you something fine. You can see the roads that we all traveled just to get here, a million minuscule decisions in a line. Why they brought us to this moment isn't clear, but that's all right. We've got all night. Could it be that the many roads you took to get here were just for me to tell this story and for you to hear this song? I want to share with you a story. It goes back about 20 years in my life to a moment where I found myself sleeping in the parking lot of a local swim club at 4 a.m. and how that particular moment led me to be here with you this morning. Now, I should warn you ahead of time, anytime you give an Irish guy a microphone, we tend to go on and on and on, but I kept it under 3 hours for the 8 o'clock service, so I promise to do the same for you. Before we get to that pivotal moment in my life, I want to give you a little bit of backstory. I came to faith at the age of 11, spring of that year. A few months later, I found out my parents were getting divorced, and I've always credited my faith and God's mercy for getting me through middle school and the early years of high school and not wandering off down some dark path. But one thing I was always missing through those early years was a local faith community. I grew up in the Catholic Church and wasn't connected to a parish at that time. And my faith community was the traveling ministry that I went around with. Some of you have been around for a while may remember a ministry called Musicon, and that was pivotal to my formation as a Christian youth. Jumping ahead to the summer of 1998 was a big summer for me. I was already playing music. I played French horn, but that summer I got my first guitar. I was convinced if I could get a guitar, then I could get a girlfriend too. Didn't exactly happen that summer, but that summer I also met a lovely young lady who I knew from the moment that I met her I was going to marry her. Her name is Nicole, this girl that I met. Also the girl that I married. We'll get there. And that summer, through traveling with Musicon, I actually came to St. Paul's for my first time. We always finished up our summer tour by St. Paul's as our first church back in Connecticut. So it was a bit of a homecoming for us as a ministry since we were Connecticut-based. And I knew from the first Sunday I was here, there's something special about this place. This room was just always filled with the Spirit. We're just entering into his presence as we gather. Jump ahead another year, so this next summer. At this point, Nicole and I were dating. And I was in a rock band. We were pretty popular in my very small high school, so take that for what it's worth. And most importantly for me, I thought I was getting ready to apply to the colleges I wanted to go off and study music as a French horn major. But if we fast forward to the end of high school, now the girl had dumped me, the band had split up, and I did not end up at the college that I thought I was due, which is a story for another time. We'd be here all day if I got into that. I ended up at a college that I had no interest in attending, still studying music, but wasn't where I thought my life was going and wasn't where I wanted to be. Then to rub salt in that wound, at the end of the year, I was administratively withdrawn, partially due to some errors, partially due to some ignorance on my part, not really knowing the process. So I found myself having to move back home with the year of school not counting for anything, but still having to pay for it. I still can't quite figure out how that happened, but it's behind me at this point. So at the age of 19, I found myself in sizable debt, back home with no friends, still no faith community, no girl, and no music to rely back on. It's such a big part of my youth growing up to that point. But I'd given it up because I believed a lie that someone told me one day. Now, when I was back home, I needed to pay off, to me, what was a sizable debt at the time, and I ended up working 4 jobs. My typical day was getting up at 3 in the morning, work usually till about 9 o'clock at night, Monday through Saturday. Sundays were the best day, not because I went to church, but because I only had to work 1 job. Everything else was closed that day. And it was usually on Sundays that I would pull into this parking lot halfway through my paper route, and I would take a quick nap, usually only 45 minutes or so, just enough to kind of let me power through the end of the route, go home and go back to sleep. One particular morning, after weeks and weeks of working this crazy schedule, I was just absolutely exhausted. I couldn't keep my eyes open. Pulled in and fell asleep. What I did not know is that there was a major rainstorm coming through, and I always just left my window open. It was a warm October morning. So as much to my surprise, when about 20 minutes into my nap, I woke up soaking wet on the left side of my body, even more tired because I kind of woke up in that odd part when I was sleeping. And as I'm rolling my window up, I just remember thinking and praying to God for the first time in a while at that point, just, God, how did I get to this point? This wasn't where my life was supposed to go. This wasn't where I thought you were going to send me. And so I just prayed, God, if you'll get me out of this mess that I made, because he didn't make the mess, right? If you'll get me out of this mess that I made, I'll do better. I'll serve you better. I'll love you better. I'll worship you better. I hadn't gone off the rails too crazy. I wasn't living a bad life necessarily, but I wasn't walking in fellowship with God. Now, the pool club that I took a nap in was the Koinonia Pool Club. Now, if you've been here more than 6 months, you've probably heard Father Joe use that word on more than one occasion. And koinonia means fellowship, community, or communion among believers, and in turn then communion with God. And that's what I was missing in my life at that point. And how many times did I pull over and stop in that parking lot, and it took a rainstorm coming through to actually wake me up and realize I was missing that communion in my life. So not having a faith community at home, I knew that was something I needed. And so I prayed that I would get out of the situation I was in. And a few months later, I had the opportunity to get a job in Danbury. Now, I grew up clear across the other side of the state. I had been to St. Paul's before. I used to drive 2 hours to come down. There was a girl I was dating at the time that maybe had something to do with it, but it really was the church, I promise you. So for those of you who know that I drive an hour down to church now, you might think that's a long time, but 2 hours was twice as long, so I'm used to it. And found the job in Danbury and had somebody who lived in the area, actually Chris Johnson, who worked here at the time, had been asking me for months and months to come down and be his roommate because he wanted a roommate in the area. And we made that work. So within months, I had just a few months from that moment in the parking lot, had my debts paid off, had the opportunity for full-time work, started attending St. Paul's again right after I moved down here. And that summer, because I lived in the area, I reconnected with Nicole. So, and I was then about a year and a half later, I had the opportunity to join the music team here. I got started playing. I hadn't played music in almost 3 years at that point, but got the opportunity to do so again here at St. Paul's. So the story ends there, right? That's the happy ending. I got back with God, got back with the girl, and got back with music. So you could think I could end here, but I'm Irish, so I can't, right? So, as those of you who are keeping score at home, you probably know over the next few years, Nicole and I got married, bought a house, and started our family journey together, continued to play music here at St. Paul's. You probably also know about some of the hurdles that we faced early on. That our son Caden, who was born just a little bit early, was in and out of the hospital the first couple of weeks of his life and the challenges that came with that. You probably know that our oldest daughter, Adeline, who was born at 33 weeks, had to spend the first 3 weeks of her life in the NICU and the struggles that we had to face with that. And through those early struggles with our family, there was another thread that was being woven into my life. I had always been a musical person, always helped to write music, whether it was in class or in the band that I was in, but I never actually ever sat down and tried to write my own song. And a couple weeks after Caden was born, I got my guitar out and started writing my first song. And I I thought it was okay. So after a long time, probably a year and a half ago, or a year and a half or so, I thought I might introduce it here at the church. I did so anonymously. I didn't want the fact that my name was tied to it to influence that, whether it be positive or negative. I tried to remain kind of fly under the radar with the music that I was writing. I continued to write and introduce another new song and another new song over the course of a few years. And now switching back to my family, during that time, we found out we were expecting again, and ended up losing that pregnancy. It was a little boy that we named Elijah. And that kind of rocked our world. Our life had been going pretty well, all things considered, up until that point. So losing the pregnancy was certainly a shock to us. We always ask the question, something like happens, why would God let something like happen? We're trying to do our best to follow him, to serve him, to worship him. Why do those things happen? And those are the questions that we asked in the months that followed. And so it was the better part of a year later. I found myself one morning out for a walk very early. I was going to a conference that day, and I was nervous about the conference, and I was struggling and questioning what God's plan was for our family journey. The conference was a songwriting conference, which had originally started as a much bigger event and had been boiled down to myself and one other songwriter going and meeting with this band I had heard of but didn't really know, called Brothers McClurg. And I was nervous that I was going to be on display there that day. And it turns out I was a bit, but it was a fine day and made some good friends that day. But I didn't know that going in. I didn't know what it was going to be like. I didn't know if I should be going. A lot of people had canceled, and I second-guessed myself and thought maybe I should cancel too. And then on the second half of that walk that morning, I prayed for our family and just said, God, what is your plan? What is next for our family? Can you show us the answer? If it's not the answer we want, we'll find a way to be okay with that. But please let it be that we'll have more kids. I went off to the conference that day, and as I was leaving, heading back to the car, one of the guys from the band, his name is Chris, said as we're getting in our car, he said, hey, if you ever want to record some of your music, give me a call and let's talk and let's do that. And I drove home at first thinking, wow, that's really great. What an answer to prayer. And by the time I got home, it was about a 2.5 hour drive. By the time I got home, I thought, he's just saying that to be nice. He doesn't really mean it. That's not the case. And walked upstairs. Everybody was asleep. It was late in the night. I went in to brush my teeth, and on the counter, Nicole had left a positive pregnancy test. And I remember as I'm brushing my teeth thinking, God, if you could answer all my prayers the same day from now on, that would be really great. I'd like to say that he still does that. I'm just too dumb to notice it at times, but I'm working on it. So this was the answer to our prayer. This is the redemption story. Everything was coming back together the way I thought things were going to be. But a few months later, we lost that little boy as well. It was actually the weekend before Thanksgiving that we found out about both losses for Elijah and Emmanuel. And that was a tough winter for us. We thought that God's redemption story had been written into our lives, only to have it pulled out from under us. There's a lot of frustration, a lot of anger towards God, towards ourselves, towards the world in general. But started to move on, started to heal with that process, much through my journey with music. And over the course of the next year after that happened, I started running into Chris and the other guys at various events around either local or just in the area. And some were planned and some weren't, but I found myself talking to these guys on multiple occasions. And every time as we're leaving, Chris saying, hey, if you ever want to record, come on up to the studio and we'll do that. And again, by the time I got home, I thought, he's just saying that to be nice. He doesn't actually mean it. At this point, I'd written a few songs that we were singing here at St. Paul's, and this was the spring of 2017. And a few of you had come up to me over the course of a very short period of weeks and asking me about a particular song that we had sung and saying, oh, I really like that song. Very nice comments, and I was just always very complimentary. Still not wanting to say that I had written them, just accepting the compliment as it was. Until Mary Perry came up to me one day, and I'm calling her out by name, because I can't not tell her the whole truth. There's something about Mary. If you've spoken to her, you know what I mean. She came up and said, that song we sang to me is my favorite song, but I can't find it anywhere. How can I find that song? And I just finally had to fess up and say, Mary, you can't find that song because I wrote it and it's not recorded anywhere. Mary said to me, you need to record that song. And having a conversation with my wife a few weeks later and telling her about these several circumstances with people coming up to my music, she thought, well, maybe Mary's right. Maybe you should record the music. I married a very, very wise woman, but at this moment I thought she was very, very foolish, that there was no reason that should actually be the case. She was wrong, Mary was wrong. That wasn't going to be the case to happen. A few weeks later, I found myself back out on a walk. I know I sound very holy and pious that I go on these prayer walks every morning, and I'd love to say I do, but that's not the case in my everyday life. One day I'd like to be there, but I do try to do that sometimes. But on this walk, this notion that I should do something more with my music just kept bugging me for a few days. So I just said, God, I don't know what to do, but give me a clear sign and I'll respond. I got back to my house and made a cup of coffee. As I sat down to drink my coffee, I happened to open up Facebook on my phone. And the very top post that morning was from Chris, the guy I had met. And it said, we're booking studio time for January of 2018. Message me if you're interested. I still don't know if that post went to all of Facebook or just to me, but I immediately closed the phone and put it down and thought, okay, I guess that's probably a sign. Maybe I should do. So before I could think anymore, I messaged Chris and got the process started to record music. Recording music is expensive, and I knew that I needed to raise funds in order to do that. And as the months went on, as we're getting ready to start that campaign, I really started to have doubts. That summer I was leading the youth group on a mission trip to Chicago. If you've ever driven a van full of high school students, they don't want to talk to you. You're the old guy driving the van. So I had 2 days driving out to Chicago just to think for myself, really. And by the time I got there, I had convinced myself it was all a lie. It was all something that shouldn't happen, and I was going to call Chris when I got back and just cancel the whole thing. And that week, had the opportunity, one of the adult leaders that was going out with me named Evan, and one of the students named Connor Richardson, his parents are here today. The three of us had the opportunity to lead worship, just by circumstance. We didn't plan it, but the organization asked us to lead music that week. It included a community service with the multilingual Spanish church that was hosting us. And we had a great rockin' evening. I think it was the Thursday night of that week. And had an amazing service, one of the coolest church services I've ever had the privilege of being a part of. And as we're finishing up and I'm actually packing up, and I remember I was actually coiling my guitar cable, and I felt this hand on my shoulder, and I turned, and it's one of the pastors, the senior pastor's wife, who I hadn't met, hadn't seen, hadn't spoken to all week. And she turned to me in her very thick accent. She says, God wants you to continue to write music, so keep writing music. I almost dropped my guitar. Luckily, I don't and just couldn't believe, and I didn't know what to say. All I could say was thank you, and went back. So then the whole ride home from Chicago for 2 days, all I could think of was, okay, maybe I am supposed to do this. To shorten up the rest of the story, I did end up having the opportunity to go out and record, much to support from family and friends and those of you here at St. Paul's. Since then, I've had the opportunity to go out and still play or continue to play, mostly with Connor and Evan. Caden, my oldest, actually comes out with me now and has been for about a year. And I consider it a privilege to go out and certainly share my music, but to share my story, my testimony. I go into much more detail. So if you think this is long, come to a concert one time. And with the intent and the hope that I'll inspire and encourage those who are on their faith journey. Maybe they went through the same experience of losing a child, or maybe they went through something even far worse. But I try to be open and honest with my struggles through those losses and the struggle I have with my faith and the way God works to bring me back. But it's also a time to fellowship and minister with Connor, with Evan, with my son Caden, and to continue to pour into their lives. Evan and Connor were both youth group students at one point here at the church, so to continue to work and minister with them. Although I do consider them more friends than students at this point, it's a pleasure to go out and serve with them. Oswald Chambers often says in his book, My Utmost for His Highest, that we are called to be broken bread and poured out wine. And that's what I look to do when I go out and play, just to be open and honest, to be broken and served as Christ would have me. So now, I don't want you to think that I have delusions of grandeur, that I've been fortunate that I've been able to record a couple of projects. I don't expect to be a touring artist someday. I don't expect music on the radio. But I do believe God has called me to do this. I think the signs were too clear to ignore, that God set me on this path to do something. And it may just be here in the region. It may just be with the guys that I travel with. I don't know what that will look like. But I feel that I'm being led down the path to continue with that journey. One of the struggles of being an independent artist is having to do everything yourself. And a little over a year ago, I was talking with Nicole and just sharing that struggle and basically saying, what I'm missing, the other independent artists that I see that are maybe reaching more people and doing more things, as they have a team around them, and I'm just me, which is a struggle a lot of independent artists have. And I just remember thinking, God, if I could have a team around me, this could go somewhere. Again, not anywhere huge, but it could really become something that could be lasting more than the next few months that I can see ahead. A couple of weeks later, I met a guy named Andy, and Andy runs a company called Resound Media, and one of his companies within that is called Homegrown Worship. And Homegrown Worship is an indie artist label that serves to provide artists or to provide label services to independent artists. So you remain completely independent, still raising your own funds, still, I won't get into the business of all of it, but I'm still very much independent. But as I'm talking with Andy and we're going back and forth, he basically says, hey, I have a team that can support you. I'd like to sign you on to our program and become part of the Homegrown Worship label. Again, it was an answer to the prayer of what do I do on this journey with my music. So I signed on, and I'm fortunate to say that I've had more music funded, and we'll be recording and releasing new music next year, early next year, hopefully. If you'd like to hear more about the music aspect of it, I have a table set up down at Coffee Hour. Caden will be down there. He's really excited. And there's just a little handout you can take and find out how you can continue to support that. I'd certainly ask all of you to support that in prayer as you think of me over the next couple of years that we've kind of committed to this journey. Just pray for travel. Just pray for the people that we come in contact with. Pray for us as we continue to minister together. And if you'd like to go beyond that, you can find that information downstairs. Getting back to the thread of my family. After we lost the two boys, we weren't really sure what was going to happen next, but we believed that God was not done with our family. And in the winter of 2018, we found out Nicole was expecting again. Unfortunately, we lost that little girl who we named Luca. And again, still confused and not sure what was going on with our family, but we continued to press on in the journey and thought, well, we'll try again next year. And so when the winter of 2019 came along, Nicole was expecting again. And we lost another little girl, we found out, who we named Remy. And after 4 losses in a row, we did what we should have done from the start and just handed it over to God and just said, God, we can't plan anymore. We can't make any more decisions on our own for our family. Only you can. And if it's your will that we would, our family would continue to grow, then so be it. And it was a tough decision to make because we always want to have control of our lives, right? And to hand something like that, such a big part of our desire for our family over to God, was difficult. So it was a bit of a shock, at least to me, when a couple of months later we found out Nicole was expecting again. And after the struggles we had with the early pregnancies and the losses, I was sure this was going to be a devastating occurrence. But as you all have seen and can attest to, that in January of 2020, our baby girl Kyla was born. And God had started to rewrite the story for our family. And we knew that it would be great for Kyla to have a sibling close to her age. There's 6 years between our girls, and we thought, wouldn't it be wonderful if she could grow up with a sibling close in age? We didn't want to get greedy, but we thought, man, if that could happen, God, that would be really great. So when we found out we were expecting for the 8th time, we were certainly apprehensive, but much to our joy, this summer our little boy Micah was born. Both of those pregnancies with Kyle and Micah were much, much simpler and easier than we had with any of the previous ones, which is a huge answer to prayer. But we were thrown a curveball when Micah was born and needed to be brought to the NICU right away. Thank you so much, all of you, for your prayers and support through that. We'd experienced that before, but we knew what we were getting into going into it. And it's a much different way to respond than when you're thrown a curveball at the last minute. Micah is doing well. I know many of you have continued to ask about him, so I will tell you now he's doing fantastic. Just had doctor's appointments this week. He looks great. He acts great. He's healthy. He's getting bigger every day. So thank you. And please continue to pray for him in the coming weeks and months. But in those days right after he was born, just not knowing what might happen to him, I just once again found my place in that just feeling scared, feeling terrified that something might happen to us, and knowing that would devastate our family. When Nicole was discharged from the hospital, Micah was still there, and they only allow one parent to stay. So I got to go home that night, which sounds really great, but I go home to an empty house because Dave and Connie had the older kids with them, thankfully. And so lying in bed in an empty house all alone, not being able to do anything, not having any of the family around me, all I could do was cry out to God and just ask God to save my little boy, because I didn't know what was going to happen. After a long shouting match with God, I was reminded of a song. It was actually a song I had written about a year before. I originally got the idea of the song from remembering that moment in the Koinonia parking lot, from remembering that God had come through, that he had answered that prayer, that he had set me on a new path in life. I remember God being faithful through that, and then thinking of all the times in the last 20 years that God had been faithful, even when I maybe wasn't as faithful back as I should have been. I work in sales full-time, and in the sales position, it's always, what have you done for me today? What have you sold today? Last year's sales don't matter this year. Last week's sales don't matter this week. It's a new day, it's a new year, it's always a new goal that you have to hit. And I know sometimes I treat God like that, and maybe you do as well. It's tough to remember when you're in a tough situation to say, hey God, what have you done for me today? And forget about what he did for you last week, last year, 20 years ago. So I'm trying to get better at that. I'm trying to remember what God has done, to be faithful back to him because he was faithful to me first. So I want to close here sharing with you that song that I wrote. But before I do that, the song for today from Psalm 46, verses 11 and 12. I just think verses that we should all remember daily. Be still then, and know that I am God. I will be exalted among the nations. I will be exalted in the earth. The Lord of hosts is with us. The God of Jacob is our stronghold. This is the song that I wrote that just reminded me of God's faithfulness. I've tasted and I've seen that the Lord is good to me. Through every drought and storm, I see his banner over me, for he is good. In the midst of suffering, I will call upon his name. My Lord will rescue me. He'll be my refuge and my strength, for he is good. I will cry and you will hear me. You deliver me from my fear. You will satisfy all my needs. Your goodness and your mercy follow me. I will bless his holy name and forever sing his praise. I will bring an offering of my worship to the King, for he is good. I will cry and you will hear me. You deliver me from my fear. You will satisfy all my needs. Your goodness and your mercy follow me. I've tasted and I've seen that the Lord is good to me, for he is good.